What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Night Owls. It is game day officially. FAU versus Boston College from the time you're watching, 7 p.m. tonight at tip-off at the Eleanor Baldwin Arena. And tonight, we have a very special guest joining us from the Locked On Boston College podcast, AJ Black. AJ, how's it going tonight?
Hey, it's going great, guys. College basketball is back. I'm excited about it. Let's chat BC and FAU.
Yeah, AJ, good to have you on. Last year was a bit of an emotional roller coaster for Boston College, only winning 4 conference games, which was kind of poor for you guys. Very disappointing for you guys, and finishing 7 games below 500 overall. What's the general mood for around this team and fan base going under year 5 for Earl Grant?
This is basically the put up or shut up year for Earl Grant, really, because you've brought him in. You've had it. He's had his chance to build the program. He had that 1 year BC made the NIT, and other than that, they really haven't been all that competitive. Now, to his credit, I really thought he did a nice job of going out into the transfer portal and adding some talent this offseason to really rebuild the BC lineup around Donald Hand, Fred Payne, and Jaden Hastings. So I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like. The exhibition games for BC haven't gone well, so there's a little bit of a concern there. They lost to Brown, they lost to UConn, but I think that the real excitement is what this team is going to look like. You have a real good scorer in Donald Hand. This is a guy that can average 20 plus points a game, but what's the guys around him going to be like? And I think that's a big question Earl Grant's going to be able to answer.
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, Donald Hand Jr., we're going to get to him in a second. But the ACC preseason media poll had BC picked dead last in the standings, dead last, which was, insane in my opinion. But honestly, rightfully so. Do you think this team is being slept on, or is it a fair prediction with where they're at going into the season?
That's a good question. Here's where I get into my I get on my soapbox and I say I don't have much faith in BC this season. As much as they went out and they landed, a former 5-star from Baylor, and they brought, Donald Hand is there. I've watched this team under Earl Grant for 5 years, and they set up an out of conference schedule. In FAU is probably one of the best teams they're going to play out of conference, but the rest of their out of conference schedule, other than LSU and the SEC challenge, isn't all that good. But that doesn't matter because Earl Grant will always lose one of these games. He lost to Dartmouth. He lost to Albany. He loses these, in Tarleton State. He loses these infuriating games that really put BC behind the 8 ball every single year. And by the time the ACC schedule starts, BC's already far behind. And then and that's when things get really tough for them. So I look at this season in the fact that they picked last. Will they finish last? I don't think they'll finish last. Will they make a tournament? I don't think they're going to do that either.
Yeah, that seems like a very fair expectation. That's kind of where FAU is right now. We're not, looking to make the tournament this year. We're looking to compete in our conference, in the American Conference, to be one of those teams on the upper half of the American Conference. And you mentioned Earl Grant under exceeding expectations, losing the games that he's expected to win and that the team is expecting to win. And it looks like this year's roster is very different from last year. No more Chad Venning, no more Elijah Strong, but also some transfers. You do get Chase Forte from South Dakota State, 18 points a game from him. So from your perspective, what was Coach Grant's main goal in building the roster this offseason?
Yeah, he just had his media day last week, and the big theme from Earl Grant is that he wanted to make BC a better defensive team. He wanted to improve the length of this team because BC last year was horrid rebounding, and defensively they just couldn't really hang tough against some of the ACC teams. So you bring in Chaz Forte, who was his conference defensive player of the year. You brought in Aiden Shaw out of Missouri, a 6'9" forward who is athletic and could give you a boost on the defensive side of the ball. You bring in Bowden Kopke from Butler, another big guy who, I think they needed some more length there. So he did a really nice job of addressing that piece. The bigger issue for BC is who's going to shoot the ball. You got you got a bunch of guys that, I know Forte can do that too, but this is a team that really, really, really struggles from outside the 3-point line. And I don't see the guys that they brought in doing that for them. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's a trade-off. You're going to be better defensively, but your offensive skill set is probably going to suffer more.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned the struggles from the perimeter. Your three guys who are going to be in the backcourt, Chase Forte, Fred Payne, and Donald Hand, all of them shoot under 37% from beyond the arc. So that is a very big struggle that we're going to see most likely, unless it has been a vocal point of fixing the perimeter struggles throughout the offseason. That's what Earl Grant has focused on. But, from these three guys, probably the best shooter may be Chase Forte. He is shooting 47% from inside, from the field. So, obviously very poor from beyond the arc, but from the field overall, he did shoot very strong last year. And speaking of Chase Forte, how big of a role does he have this year, and what should FAU fans expect from him running the show for you guys offensively?
BC really lacked a point guard last year. That was a big thing that they didn't, they lost Jaden Zachary the year before. He was the point guard for 2 years. He ends up transferring to Clemson. You really saw what he was able to do for BC. He was a dynamic point guard. I thought he was really undervalued in terms of what he was able to do. Last year, you had a bunch of different guys trying, whether it was Chaz Kelly or Dion Brown. They had a bunch of different guys trying to be the point guard. It just was not working. So again, Grant, I thought he did a nice job, goes out there and gets a solid point guard, Chaz Forte, and he's going to be a distributor out there. He can shoot the ball, but he can also pass the ball, and that's another piece that BC is just going to need to get better at. In years past, their offensive sets are kind of stagnant. They're not the most dynamic offensive group you're going to see. It's a lot of handoffs and then just, ISO shots and things like that. And it's not a very dynamic offense. So to get a point guard in there to hopefully move the ball around and get some of these other guys moving and keep the ball moving will hopefully minimize the turnovers and get things going. I love this new open exhibitions that they're doing because they played UConn, who's obviously got roots with BC back to their Big East days. They play them. I gotta say, I know it's an exhibition. They're playing, 15 guys or whatever just to give them, exposure. BC finishes that game with 2 assists. 2. That worried me because that was a big issue last year. If that happens again this year, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So hopefully that was just a blip on the radar. But again, that showed to me like, okay, this might be a bigger systemic issue that BC has. And I'm not sure if Chaz Forte is going to be enough to fix. I mean, Chase Forte is going to be enough to fix that.
Yeah, and creating shots was one of the big struggles that we were talking about leading up to this week. No one on the roster averaged more than 3.5 assists last season. So,
Yep.
like you mentioned, a lot of ISO shots, a lot of shots that don't come off creating shots. One of the X factors when I look at this roster is Jason Azemota from Baylor. Coach Jacobs talked about he was the main recruiter of Jason because Coach Jacobs, he was the associate head coach at
Yep.
Baylor. He's FAU's head coach, so he knows him well, and he seems like he's kind of the X factor for you guys this year. 5-star recruit. You mentioned him. He's long, athletic. How big of a ceiling raiser could he be if he figures it out early for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking Boston College here. Boston College is not a school that is going to light the world on fire in terms of recruiting. They have their academic standards. They have the lack of NIL. There's a lot of issues that BC has they're dealing with that doesn't allow them to get, Massachusetts honestly is a pretty rich area. You see a lot of good players come out of the state, but most of them do not end up at BC. Now to get Asamoah, who's from Lynn, which is about 20 minutes, 30 minutes north of Boston, back home, was a really big coup for BC. Like, this is a kid obviously had a ton of offers coming out of high school, did, he was buried on Baylor's depth chart. He enters the portal, comes home to be, to the Boston area. And he's got, again, that size and that length that I think BC really needs. I didn't see, he was much more of an afterthought than I thought he would be when we watched the exhibition game against UConn. But I'm really interested to see how he develops. Maybe he's the kind of guy, a lot of times you see, especially at a school like BC, which is more of a developmental school, a guy like him who comes in slowly, right? Like through the out of conference play, maybe this game against FAU, you don't see a whole lot of him. But when it gets to the ACC part of the schedule, he starts to bump up. You saw that with Jaden Hastings last year. Like, it just took a little while to get him into it. So I'm wondering if maybe this is a guy that starts slow, comes out, but also gives you a little bit more, especially on the defensive side of the ball, at the four position.
Yeah, AJ, I really like that what you said. But before I talk about my X factor for this game, I want to talk about Donald Hand Jr. Everybody on the ACC knows about how good Donald Hand Jr. is. Obviously,
Yep.
the main guy, the main scorer for Boston College. Obviously, he averaged 15 points a game last season. And then during conference play, he averaged some stretches 22 points per game. How big of a guy offensively can Donald Hare Jr. be, and can he be the main guy for not for FAU or against FAU?
Yeah, I mean, he was the biggest story of the offseason for BC because as JJ said to start this off, BC ended the year last year with 4 ACC wins. They missed the ACC tournament because they don't allow every team in now with the addition of Stanford, Cal, and SMU. And so, the portal hit hard again because BC's not playing well. And the big, additions during the offseason was that there were 3 days in a row where it was Donald Hand announcing he was staying, Jaden Hastings announcing he was staying, and Fred Payne announcing they were staying. So Donald Hand is the biggest scorer on this team. And really, he is enough to help BC win games. Like, he can score, he can do things off the dribble, he can, be aggressive and help BC win football. Yeah, I've been talking football all day, basketball games. So I think he really, the fact that he didn't enter the portal was huge because I have to imagine there were a lot of schools that really wanted him. And the fact that he stayed at BC because he really said the school means a lot to him, which is incredible because he hasn't really been there through much. Like, there hasn't been much there for him. That says a lot about Earl Grant. That says a lot about what they've been able to do to keep him there. I think he's dangerous. He's a incredible scorer. I'm not sure he's going to be an NBA level player, but he's definitely a guy I feel like the ACC is sleeping on and could be an all ACC player by the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree with that, AJ. Obviously, last year he won the most improved ACC player of the year, which was kind of huge for him.
Yep.
Obviously, before the question I said, AJ said, JJ said that Jason Asamoah was the X factor. I kind of disagree with what JJ said. I think John Jacobs obviously coached him at Baylor, so obviously he knows how to, work with him well. He knows his play
Yep.
style, so I think he's going to stop him, make a good game plan for Jason Asamoah. The X factor that I think can be for this Boston College team against FAU is Jaden Hastings. Like you said, obviously you talked about him so well. I think I compare him to an NBA star that I'm a big fan of, Bam Adebayo. I'm a Miami Heat fan, so I really like
Yep.
him. Jaden Hastings, obviously one of the most important players on the defensive side of the basketball. How does Boston College plan to protect the rim against a very good FAU team that moves the ball super, super well?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be all about communication, right? Like, they're going to have to. You have a lot of new names out there that have only played with each other for a couple months. It's going to be up to how they communicate, rotate, all that good stuff. And you've got guys like Hastings and Kobke who are going to be more, different styles of defenders, but very important in that sense. Hastings is a very, very athletic big from IMG Academy in Florida, and he's coming into his own. I think this could be a big year for him. The big issue with Hastings is that he's a foul machine. Like, this is a guy, and it could have just been that he was inexperienced and they threw him into a bigger role than he was ready for last year. But when he was out there with Chad Venning last year, you know, it was I think he averaged like 7 fouls per 40 minutes or something like that. Like he just was like constantly fouling. So that's a big issue, but he's big, he's athletic, he can get to the rim and make some big plays. I think that's going to be super important. I think, when Kopke's out there, because he's going to play a big role too, he's going to have to play that, the big role too, and really work those boards, because it's going to be super important against a good team like FAU.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I really like how you mentioned, communication and having these guys gel a lot of, new talent. FAU is in a very similar spot as well with so much roster turnover from last year, so many new guys this year as well. And you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that Earl Grant's teams have always been built on defense and discipline and playing tough on defense. And this year you see no different. But I was listening to Earl Grant on ACC Media Days, and he was talking about how he thinks that this team's going to shoot the three more. Last year, they shot the three on 28% of possessions. He said he wants to get that up to 40% this year and shoot the three, be better from the perimeter. Is that something that you think's really going to happen this year? Is that going to be real for FAU to want to be able to stop, or is that more like a preseason talking point that he was talking about?
I honestly think that would be a smart move, because what BC was shooting a ton of last year was long range twos, and they weren't good at it. And that was it's the poorest place on the floor to shoot from, and BC consistently would try that shot. Like, you don't get the bonus of hitting a three, and it's a lower percentage shot. They were doing that a lot last year, and if they go towards the three, good, that's good. But again, I go back to the UConn game, just an exhibition. I again had the worries. I think they shot like 11% from 3-point range, which lines up to what they were doing last year, where there were games where they just were ice cold from three. Um, you know, they have guys, Hand can shoot the three at times. I'm sure Payne can too. But the new guys they brought in, Shaw, Asamoah, I don't see any of them as big 3-point shooters. Forte probably will be. But if that's what they're going to live and die by, I'm a little concerned that that's what Earl Grant wants to go through, because I just don't see that on this roster.
Yeah, 100% in mid. FAU is like a complete polar opposite. We shot 55% from three in our exhibition against Florida Tech. Granted, it's Florida Tech, but still 13 for 24 from beyond the arc. We're gonna like to take those threes, and unlike you guys who shot 11%, that's kind of our main identity on the offensive side. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think on offense? BC's offensive identity is going to be? Are they going to look to pound it inside, play through Donald Hand, or rely on their spacing and athleticism?
I think they're going to go through Hand. I think really the offense is going to have to go through Hand and Payne. Those are the two guys that can really score buckets for you. You're going to have those athletic shots, and you're going to try to pound it in a little bit through Hastings. But I think really when BC's playing at their highest level, it's going to be Donald Hand shooting the ball, because he's your volume scorer. He's the guy that you got to get him going early. If he goes ice cold, the big worry is there's not really a lot of scoring on this roster. So he's gonna have to carry the load, and that's why I said like 20-25 points per game. Really specifically on the out of conference schedule, that's what we're gonna have to see out of Donald Hand, because I think he's gonna be really that big weapon for BC.
Yeah, AJ, I really like what you said. Donald Hand's going to be a huge factor on the offensive side of the ball for Boston College. But one thing FAU does really well is spacing and ball movement. How do you see Boston College matching up for it defensively with all the shooting and cutting FAU brings? So that's going to be, a really tough matchup for Boston College.
Yeah, it's gonna, again, I go back to communication. How are they going to be able to communicate and make sure that rotations are going, and that they're not, missing out on guys as they, swing passes around. When BC is on, they can be really tight. That's like, again, Earl Grant's, his philosophy when he was hired here was BC's going to be pretty gritty, not pretty. That's what he said. And that's kind of his MO. So they're going to try to muck things up. They're going to try to cause turnovers. And they inconsistently they can do that, and it's going to be interesting with a new roster how they actually perform at that level. Are they get able to cause turnovers, get loose balls, do things like that? But I think there's going to be there's a lot of new guys on there, and we're going to have to wait to see how they look. You get a guy like Luka Taves. This is a Jonathan Taves of the NHL. This is his cousin. He played last year as a point guard. A lot of hype about him coming in, and he really struggled last year. This is a kid that was supposed to be your point guard. He's 6 feet, 5'11", something like that. And now he's back. Will he be able to do that kind of stuff? I'm not sure, but there's other guys that we're gonna have to wait to see. There's freshmen coming in that we haven't seen play. There's a lot of BC has so many question marks, and if you just go off the law of averages of what they've done in the past, you're a little bit more skeptical of what those question marks will turn into.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. Right now spread sits at 1.5 for FAU. You talked about Boston College's struggles in the exhibition games. FAU's exhibition game went pretty well. They won by 40 plus points. The spread opened as 1.5. So if Boston College, I guess, wants to pull off the upset because they are underdogs, what has to go right for them, and what do you think their formula is to success to slow down FAU?
So I look at what BC has to do a few different things, right? As I said, on the defensive side of the ball, the communication has to be good. Like you got a whole bunch of new players out there. They've got to be able to communicate, and they've got a roster of guys that can play defense. But if they don't know what to do, that's going to be an issue. BC's going to win if they don't turn the ball over, which they have they notoriously are sloppy with the basketball, and are able to get hand going, right? Like they're able to get that going, and really to get something out of their bench, because you're going to have Fred Payne, in hand and Hastings, but who on the bench is going to be your scorer? They got a kid from Montenegro, Mario Rendongovic, I think his name is. He just signed like 2 weeks ago. Looked good in the exhibition game. I didn't even know he was going to be on the team now, but he's there. He's a forward. Like he looked good, so maybe he's a guy that gets to play, and that's where you're going to see Asamoah probably off the bench too. Like who on the bench is going to be able to score for BC and be able to give them valuable minutes while Hand has to sit? That's going to be something important too.
Yeah, it's very important. The bench for Boston College needs to get going, and Donald Hand's going to be the big, X factor or the big guy
Yep.
offensively for Boston College. Obviously, you said communication was the biggest thing, but on the flip side, what's the biggest concern going into this game against FAU on the season opener?
Oh, it's everything that BC's dealt with in the last 5 years. I got to say, shooting threes, that's going to be the big thing.
Yeah.
Can BC shoot it from downtown? Because if I've watched enough BC basketball to watch them brick 3-pointer after 3-pointer and then continue to do that. And I got to say this too. I've been kind to him in this episode, but as Earl Grant coached in this game, the big knock on Earl Grant has been he hasn't been able to figure out his lineup until like 2 months into the season, and he misses out on some things that could have helped him. So his in-game coaching has been a bit of a question mark, and I'm not really sold that he's going to fix that this year. So that's going to be a big thing too. Is he going to, like, when things get tough, is he going to be able to coach this team into a win?
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Last one for you, AJ. Talked about some of the struggles. You talked about communication. You talked about where you think they could excel. And, you mentioned the international guy who signed about 2 weeks ago before, and you didn't expect him to be such a big difference. FAU, 8 international guys on their team. 3 of those signed within this summer. So, FAU is similar there. But what's your score prediction and your gut feeling heading into the game?
I won't go for a score prediction, but I will tell you who I think is going to win. I think FAU is going to win this game. As you can tell, I am much more pessimistic about this season than maybe BC fans are. Honestly, BC fans are not that pessimistic. I think most BC fans are not very optimistic about this season at all. Um, a road game, first game on the road. BC notoriously on in out of conference games have had duds against way lesser opponents than FAU. And I just think there's just too many questions, and I just don't think they're going to win.
Yeah, it makes sense for sure. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, AJ, for coming on to
Sure.
today's show. Where can everyone find you?
Well, you can find me on Locked On Boston College on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a daily Boston College podcast. If you want to hear about our 1-8 football team, you can hear it on my show. You can also hear about the basketball team too, because I talk about them sometimes too. I'm also the editor of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 network. And you can check me out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. I'm on everything. Just look for AJ Black, Eagle Insider, or Locked On BC. You'll find me.
Yeah, AJ, we really appreciate you coming on. Make sure to go over to him. And, as you guys know, on this show on Tuesdays, we do Boca, South Florida. Boca Raton High School talk. Wesley Wynn, Boston College commit and great friend of the show. So if you guys want to keep up with him, check out AJ's show as well. AJ, again, thank you so much for coming on. We're super excited for the game tomorrow. And as always, Aaron, go Owls.